Theme restaurants come in all shapes and sizes. From forests to chocolate factories, if you can think of a themed experience, there has likely been a restaurant that offered it. An industry that took off making millions in the 80s and 90s, that slowly over the decades lost their charm and became extinct. It's time to join a brand new expedition series, starting with what is often considered the first themed chain restaurant, the messy history of Hard Rock Cafe, and the one Hard Rock Cafe restaurant that sat abandoned for longer than it operated. Robert Earl's first venture into restaurants would be in 1973. Called Beefeater by the Tower and located on St. Catherine's Dock, directly next to the Tower of London, in London, he aimed to make a place that would feed not just locals, but entice tourists to come on their trips to see one of London's most iconic places. While many restaurants would hate the thought of tons of tourists pulling up for a dinner, that was what Earl wanted to embrace, and so did the Beefeater. Built in the basement vaults, he created his first dinner experience for tourists. This restaurant would be a medieval-style feast, with jugglers, acrobats, and musicians performing while the audience enjoyed a meal fit for a king. In fact, an actor actually played Henry VIII and would lord over the meal. This would be his first venture that would bring together food, show, and theme, and it would be a huge success. While most restaurants have one good sit in a night, themed tourist restaurants could have multiple throughout the day. Quickly, he would expand with further restaurants, including his first solo venture at the age of 26, Shakespeare's Tavern Under the Arches at Blackfriars, which would be another medieval banquet-style restaurant, where he had scrounged together the money to make it a success. Again, it was, and was often sold out. Further additional restaurants came, and eventually he had over 70 restaurants under his company in London. In 1977, Robert Earl would create President's Entertainment, a company devoted to themed restaurants. During the 70s, the Walt Disney Company had contacted Robert Earl with the idea of making a dinner experience inside its upcoming Epcot Center. A deal wasn't made, but it got Robert Earl thinking about the potential that Orlando would have with tourist attractions in the future, with Disney expanding.
It's good.
Orlando never left his thoughts, and in 1982, along with his wife and 2 daughters, Robert Earl would make the move to Florida. His first project in Orlando would open in 1983, taking much of what he had created in London and bringing it to the upcoming tourism capital. Shakespeare's Tavern on Church Street would invite visitors to dine while costumed English actors entertained. Further themed entertainment offerings in the area would follow. The original Shakespeare's Tavern on Church Street would get a sequel of sorts when the company would open King Henry's Feast a few years later on International Drive. They would also begin purchasing popular restaurants in the Orlando area until they were operating an empire of restaurants once again. Further dining shows followed, with the likes of Wild Bill's Wild West Show, Caruso's on International Drive, and the Royal Orleans Restaurant with the adjacent Mardi Gras Dinner Theater. Dinner shows in Orlando were booming. Any kind you could think of was coming to the area. In the late 80s, Robert Earl was asked if he worried that the ever-increasing expanding Disney World would hurt his business. He said that he only needed 3,000 of the millions coming to visit Orlando to dine at his experiences to be a success, and that wasn't very many in the grand scheme of things. A study had already confirmed that when Epcot Center opened, it had only boosted the tourism industry around the area, not taken away from it. In 1987, Robert Earl would merge his company, President Entertainment, with Pleasurama plc, a hotel and casino company. They would purchase the company for $64.8 million, and Robert Earl would become Chief Executive President of American Operations, which would be based in Orlando, Florida. Along with this, it would give him full reign to develop new ideas in the area. By this point, Robert Earl had been nicknamed the Dinner Attraction King of Orlando, and the newly formed merged British company was poised to make more US acquisitions and expansions as soon as possible and have millions of dollars to play with. Rumors began that he would be building something big in Orlando, along with maybe even buying Church Street Station, before taking what he had been built here as a blueprint to other cities. The first Hard Rock Cafe opened in June 1971 at 150 Old Park Lane, London, born from the fact that its founders were on vacation in London and they could not find a decent hamburger. It was a place that was born to bring the rock and roll movement of America to the UK, bright and brash, and everything that the British way of life saw as a new way during the late 60s. Created in partnership between Isaac Tigret and Peter Morton, it wouldn't be until a decade later that Hard Rock Cafe would come to the USA, paving the way for it to become the first themed restaurant chain in the world.
The Hard Rock in London became this mecca, and it's important to understand that you do not exploit culture. You have to earn the right to represent it. And that's what we spent the first 15 years really doing, really courting the entire industry. We were backstage, or we were, at the recording studio. We collected all of their memorabilia, their gold records, their guitars, and so forth and so on. And people would come in to see them. I think the most exciting moment of my career was the first guitar I got, which was given to me by Eric Clapton. And we put it up on the wall, and it was because the music industry hung out there continuously. It went through the whole music industry that I've taken this guitar and put it up on the wall. No one had ever seen something like that before.
With a large push of marketing, Hard Rock Cafe had become something London had never seen before. An emphasis was put on souvenirs that people could buy to spread influence and the word of mouth about the restaurant, as well, of course, as earn them more money. In reality, the rock memorabilia collecting of Hard Rock Cafe did not really begin until the restaurant in the USA opened. The original Hard Rock, when it opened, had things like truck stop signs and Americana rather than just rock and roll items. The original London location was later retrofitted with its own rock memorabilia. The partnership before the founders had come to an end when they had a falling out, and the rights for the name Hard Rock Cafe would be split between them. Isaac Tigres would get the rights to Hard Rock in the US states east of the Mississippi, along with Europe and the original location in London, while Morton had the rights to the name in the West, Hawaii, Australia, and Brazil. During an interview, Tigret claimed Morton was totally cash-oriented and that they wanted different things so they could go about business on their own. That first USA restaurant opened in 1982 as Hard Rock Los Angeles, with financial help from investors including director Steven Spielberg, Henry Winkler, and Willie Nelson. Hard Rock Cafe Los Angeles was an instant success. Both the founders began to make their own Hard Rock cafes separately in the areas they had the rights. Peter Morton would operate his company under the name Hard Rock America. Tigret continued his work under the company Hard Rock International. Each were in charge of their separate locations, using the one brand now shared between them. Either way, both were a huge success, and both companies' profits were now in the millions per year and were looking to expand. This shared partnership of the brand mostly stayed hassle-free until Tigret wanted out and began negotiating a sale of his side back to Morton. During the summer of 1986, though, Pleasurama and its president Robert Earl would pay $63 million, purchasing Isaac Tigret's part of the Hard Rock Cafe business, Hard Rock International, and stopping the reunification of Hard Rock Cafe and pulling it right out of the hands of Peter Morton. At that very same time, Pleasurama was fighting a takeover from Mecca Leisure, and soon after became tied up in tons of legal disputes over directors with Peter Morton, who said he felt slighted by the sale, as he had just lost out on buying the other half of the company for himself. Robert Earl and Peter Morton would become big rivals. Reportedly, the first time they met, Morton refused to shake hands with Earl, or often did not turn up to meetings they had scheduled. There was no co-parenting anymore of the hard rock brand, and the two enemies set out to build out separate hard rock empires. Mecca Entertainment would eventually take over Pleasurama in October 1988, and half of the hard rock name. They decided after some debate to keep the hard rock business, even though originally they were planning to sell it, and they decided to only sell some assets of the purchase in the USA, such as the Water Country USA Water Park in Williamsburg. They continued to reject bids from Peter Morton to buy the other side of the hard rock name. They were starting to like the idea of expanding the Hard Rock Cafe business in the USA, and they would keep Robert Earl in charge to do it. The whole situation and sale was extremely messy, and Hard Rock was still split in two, now with half in charge by Robert Earl, and his big plans to expand into Orlando was now set. The biggest restaurant they had ever yet built. Robert Earl would take his experience of restaurants in the Orlando area, the Hard Rock name, and create an iconic brand new restaurant at the upcoming Universal Studios Florida theme park.
You have not seen anything yet.
In March 1989, it was announced that Orlando would officially be the home of the next Hard Rock Cafe. Robert Earl, president of Hard Rock and of Mecca Leisure USA, who now owns 7 cafes, said he would spend $5 million on the very first built-from-the-ground-up Hard Rock restaurant. Robert Earl said it would add new meaning to evening entertainment in Florida and would not be like anything seen before by the company. All previous Hard Rock cafes had been retrofitted into existing buildings. Here, they would let their imaginations run wild. The Hard Rock Cafe at Universal Studios Florida would be unique. It would feature 2 separate entrances, one inside Universal Studios and one outside. That way, not only could those visiting the park come in and dine, but also those who didn't want to pay park admission. Robert Earl and Universal Studios had signed a 26-year ground lease for the new restaurant, making the location good up until 2015, and they were hopeful, along with MCA, owners of Universal, that it could become the top-grossing restaurant in the whole chain. Originally slated to open in December 1989, the delayed 500-seat Hard Rock Cafe began construction in October and was set now to open on March 17, 1990. The world's biggest Hard Rock Cafe would be 4 times the size of the original in London. Robert Earl was given the choice of building his restaurant either inside the new park or outside. They had chosen both, with an entrance for those enjoying the park that could leave with a hand stamp to enjoy dining and then return. The other side would be open from a parking lot that would be able to be visited without paying the $30 admission price for a park ticket. This unique restaurant will be built in the shape of an electric guitar lying on its back. A 300-foot bridge connected it to its parking lot. This would be seen as the guitar's neck. The whole restaurant was built on a raised platform, with 2 roads located below it. The roof of the bridge would feature lights that would give the illusion of guitar strings. Both entrances would feature an engraving, the Kingdom of Rock, and a 1950 Cadillac appeared to have crashed through the building. The 23,000 square foot restaurant on 3 stories, 2 for guest dining and 1 for the kitchens and offices, was a granite and limestone Renaissance revival style building that rise 65 feet into the air. John McCann, chief designer of the restaurant chain, said that most Hard Rocks are rehabs of existing buildings. This is the first one from the ground up, and we went all out. The guitar design was chosen as they wanted something to outshine Universal Studios, and they were curious if it would be more popular with tourists or locals. Robert Earl stated that Orlando was ready for Hard Rock. He even said that Disney World was looked up as a location, but wasn't sexy enough for the brand. During 1989, Robert Earl was chosen to give a key to the city of Orlando to Elton John before his performance at the Orlando Arena. It was said that in return, John would give Earl an item of his own choosing that is expected to be Hard Rock Orlando's first rock memento. The new restaurant would also be home to live performances from popular artists. During the late 80s, Hard Rock Cafe was often called a nightclub rather than a restaurant. The dining room featured a raised circular plaza with a stage. During 1996, Starship with Mickey Thomas would perform at the restaurant. Funnily enough, over a decade later, they would become a theme park staple. And if you're watching this video soon to when it's released, you can catch them next week at SeaWorld. And if you like, pretend you're at the original Hard Rock Cafe. If not, well, you missed them. But don't worry, they will be back at a theme park soon. They always are. The outside of the restaurant included a record-shaped, open-air plaza that could be used for live performances as well. The message on the floor here said whole lot of shaking going on. The elaborately themed restaurant would feature 25-foot stained glass windows bearing the likeness of Elvis Presley, Jerry Lee Lewis, and Chuck Berry. During a special opening VIP gala preview bash on June 5, 1990, Chuck Berry would headline the event. The restaurant's grand opening was actually delayed to July 7, 1990, the very same day that Universal Studios Florida would officially open. The interior of the restaurant would also have a red cherry wood and leather bar in the shape of a guitar, a Ted Rothstein custom stereo system with 244 speakers, the Rock and Roll Heaven illuminated hand-painted dome, and a vast array of memorabilia curated by Steve Ruffier. The 500 displays, more than any other Hard Rock, included suits worn by the Beatles, Elvis's 1926 Gibson guitar and a suit of his, Bob Dylan's manuscript for the song I Want You. The restaurant would also include movie memorabilia, such as Marilyn Monroe's dress worn in Bus Stop. You know what? It would take me all day to list all the memorabilia in the restaurant at opening. One major display was an area dedicated to the TV show Leave It to the Beaver. It was also said the rock and roll memorabilia on display would rotate around the world as new updated versions would come in often. What they had built and designed for Hard Rock Orlando would essentially become a blueprint for multiple Hard Rock cafes that would open later. Of course, there was also the classic Hard Rock food, including burgers, barbecue chicken ribs, and more, and a huge section to purchase merchandise, which was now making up 50% of Hard Rock Cafe's annual revenue. The merchandise shop here featured bricks from the original Cavern Club in Liverpool. Hard Rock Cafe Orlando was an instant success, one of the most memorable dining parts at the new Universal Studios and seen as an icon. A restaurant that would literally be the blueprint for future successful restaurants for the company that changed Hard Rock Cafe's design forever, along with being the most successful Hard Rock Cafe ever made and the highest profit restaurant in the chain. During 1990, Rank Leisure USA would purchase Mecca and take over Hard Rock International, keeping Robert Earl as CEO. This Orlando restaurant will remain a staple of Universal Studios Florida in the early years. After just 8 years, 1998 would mark the final year for the entrance to the original Hard Rock Cafe location from inside the park, and the pathway was closed permanently in December. The $5 million highest grossing Hard Rock Cafe would close forever, only just a few years after it had opened. By the end of the 90s, Hard Rock Cafe at Universal was making millions and millions a year, one of the most successful restaurants in the whole world. Hard Rock was now a home name brand, and everybody wanted one of those Hard Rock location shirts. Shortly after closing, the hand-stamp exit to the restaurant within the park was demolished, and Woody Woodpecker's Kid Zone would be added to that park in that area shortly after. Hard Rock Cafe's time at Universal, though, was not over. A new version of the restaurant, which took much inspiration from the original, would be coming. Universal Orlando would be adding City Walk, an entertainment district out the front of the park, and this new development would leave the original Hard Rock sat in an awkward position outside this new area, and it was deemed it had to be moved. Hard Rock Cafe would move to City Walk in a brand new building, complete with a full live entertainment arena. This version of the restaurant is still open today, one of the few that has been at City Walk since its opening, and the second Hard Rock Cafe has now been open for way longer than the first version ever was. The original restaurant, though, after the second opened, was not demolished. The Guitar Neck Bridge would eventually be removed to make way for the Hard Rock Hotel, which opened adjacent to the former closed cafe at the end of 2000. If you park at the Hard Rock Hotel today on the right-hand side of the lobby, you are essentially in the parking lot for the original restaurant. For 13 years after closing, the original Hard Rock Cafe sat there, unused, other than sometimes for storage, just outside the park. Eventually, the old iconic shaped building would be demolished in September 2011. It sat abandoned for longer than it ever operated. Very little remains, as the road which once ran underneath it is often still used today as a backstage access road for the park. Today, if you ever ride the Mardi Gras parade or head back that way to a haunted house, the road you enter on was the original road which went under the restaurant. If you look closely to the side of it, you can see the curved section of the Record Plaza that once sat outside the restaurant right behind Troll's Troller Coaster. There is a mystery, or I guess legend, about the Hard Rock Cafe Orlando that dates back to this original location. You may know that behind the current Hard Rock sits a piece of the Berlin Wall. This piece was previously displayed at this original Hard Rock Cafe, and the legend goes that the wall previously had graffiti on it, like much of the Berlin Wall, and a worker accidentally power washed it off when cleaning it. This is more of an urban legend than a real fact. In reality, even when it was moved to the second Hard Rock location, it was faded from when it originally debuted, and it was likely from sitting outside in the Florida sun. Though I guess if you look at it, it does kinda look washed off sometimes. Many people wonder what a piece of the Berlin Wall has to do with Hard Rock. The original Hard Rock Cafe opened in June 1990, and the wall came down in Berlin in November 1989. The restaurant is often said that it is on display as a piece of history that fits with the Hard Rock Cafe motto, "Love all, serve all," an item that symbolizes the fall of oppression. However, its reason goes deeper than that. The graffiti, which was originally on this piece of wall when Hard Rock got it, was the same logo that is used on Roger Waters of Pink Floyd's The Wall Live in Berlin album. The album is a live recording of a show held in Berlin to commemorate the fall of the Berlin Wall 8 months earlier. This concert was held on July 21st, 1990, a month after the original Hard Rock Cafe Orlando had opened. The graffiti that was on this piece of wall was added after the wall fell, or at least the logo part of it was, and after that it was donated to Hard Rock Cafe's memorabilia collection, and eventually, by 1994, put on display in Orlando, where it has remained, albeit moved, ever since. The Hard Rock Cafe and its brand that started all those years ago in London still continues to be a success today. The restaurant at Universal City Walk still remains one of the most popular in the whole brand. Peter Morton would eventually sell his half of the restaurant in 1996, and the Hard Rock brand was whole again. It was later sold to the Seminole tribe of Florida and is one of the few early themed restaurant chains that did not go bankrupt and continues to be a success.
4 years ago, Sylvester Stallone, Bruce Willis, Demi Moore, and myself, we got together to create a unique tribute to movies.
Before the Hard Rock Cafe brand was back together as one in 1996, in 1992, Peter Morton, owner of half the Hard Rock name, filed a lawsuit in federal court. He claimed that another themed restaurant was copying his idea with a chain of highly publicized entertainment-themed restaurants that were similar but of lower quality. From the moment the two founders of Hard Rock Cafe had split the brand, it had continued to get messier and messier. And with this lawsuit, Hard Rock International would also sue Peter Morton, claiming his new Vegas casino would tarnish the Hard Rock name. Peter Morton's $1.5 billion trademark infringement lawsuit was aimed at Robert Earl for something new that he had created, Planet Hollywood, a place that at the time was called the bastard child of Hard Rock Cafe, and Morton had contended that Robert Earl had used his final months as CEO of Hard Rock Cafe to rip off the concept. Robert Earl's counter was that everyone was creating a theme chain restaurant. The other original founder of Hard Rock Cafe, Isaac Tigret, was launching House of Blues, and even Spielberg, who helped fund the original US cafe, was about to open Dive. The difference was that none of them were the current CEO of Hard Rock, but themed restaurants were about to explode throughout the United States. Welcome to Expedition Restaurants. Thank you so much for watching this first episode of Expedition Restaurants. If you enjoyed it, make sure you subscribe to join the expedition. Follow us on social media for updates on upcoming episodes. And a special thank you to our patrons and YouTube members for supporting the channel. We will see you next time.